Good morning, everyone. My name's Andrea Barnes, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees. This morning, I have a few announcements. Cedars, in partnership with Kol Shalom, offers Super Suppers dinners on the last Tuesday of each month. This month, our Super Suppers will be Tuesday, February 28th, and we really need folks to sign up to help with our Super Suppers. The Super Suppers is a free meal for those in need, provided by members of the Bainbridge Island Interfaith Council. Please sign up using the Sign Up Genius link in this week's Beacon. If you have any questions, please contact Mike Cox. Also today, after service, we have a new member gathering after service. And then after that, Fran, you also had an announcement you wanted to make?
So I'm Fran Corton, and I chair your music committee. And I wanted to welcome Meredith back as our pianist. We're very delighted to have her as a regular pianist for us. And there is something called the Interfaith Council's Music Festival that's going to be held on Saturday, March 18th. At 3 o'clock, right down the street at the Grace Church. So, of course, we don't have a choir. We used to sing in the interfaith choir every year, and then they didn't hold it during the pandemic, but now they're holding it again. And I am here to announce that Meredith is our entry. Yay! So she will play some phenomenal piece that she hasn't decided on yet at the festival, and we will be well represented. So thank you, Meredith.
The opening words for this service are an excerpt from the Article 2 Study Commission. We'll talk a little bit more about the Article 2 Study Commission later on during the sermon. But if you haven't heard, the Article 2 Study Commission is a group of Unitarian Universalists who have been tasked with revisiting what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist in the 21st century. As part of this, they are looking at Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. Now that might sound very technical, but essentially Article 2 is the section of our bylaws as an association that outlines the sources that we draw from, as well as the values and principles that we hold. This is our sources and principles section. So this excerpt is part of what is being suggested as the revision, and we'll talk more about it later. But I want to share these words to invite us into this time together. So let us take a breath. And center ourselves in this moment in the love of community. As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us to live into our values. We respect the histories, context, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestries we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. Come, let us worship together.
Really, it feels wrong we just don't burst out in applause. In his 1946 essay, Politics and the English Language, George Orwell laments that the English language is in a bad way. His focus is on political language, but he argues that the effects have spread like spilled oil over the ocean. His main points are that language is often used to conceal or blunt the truth, to make murder sound respectable, or as Orwell says, give the appearance of solidity to pure wind. He claims that writers accomplish this by using long words where short words will do, using overused, stale metaphors, and just using too many words. You should always cut words out if you can. He creates a specific example by translating Ecclesiastes 9:11 into modern English. The original, I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. His translation goes like this: objective consideration of contemporary phenomena compels the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that considerable elements of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. Which of these is closer to current modern prose? I find that the possibility of changing our 7 principles leaves me feeling a little sad. And I started looking for some context to examine why. And then I remembered Orwell's essay. Consider our 7th principle: respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. Is the web of all existence a stale metaphor? Of course, our 7th principle was written before the existence of the World Wide Web. But I Googled the web of all existence, and every single reference to it also referred to our 7th principle. Webs are both strong. Consider the hapless insect who will never again feel the wind under his wings, but also fragile, as I know from walking through them, but also strong as I fight to remove the interconnected strands from my face and my hair. In fact, whether this principle makes us feel happy because we're all connected and we're all in this together, or trapped because we are unable to escape the grasp of this spider, the language here is clear and concise. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence in which we are all ensnared. Or look at the 2nd principle: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. These 7 words are easily as powerful as the Golden Rule. If this single principle were applied by every person on this planet, we wouldn't need the other 6 principles. And the language, justice, equity, compassion, obscures nothing. Its power is its simplicity. Orwell makes another point. He says, but if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. As human beings, we are able to express. What we are able to express influences what we are able to think. But doesn't that imply that noble language can also ennoble thought? I have listened to multiple sermons in this space given by people grappling with how to apply our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, how to apply this to every person, whether an unrepentant criminal or a disingenuous and selfish politician. Of course, in these sermons, we are never given instructions on how to apply this principle. Rather, we are shown the anguish of the struggle in trying to live up to these words. With the first principle, we take the language for our own and let it change who we are. It is not corrupt, and I think Orwell would approve. So I dedicate the lighting of our flaming chalice to 38 good years of the 7 principles. Please join with me in repeating our affirmation as printed in your order of service. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we will all become the best that we can be.
I invite you to mask up and stand up if you are willing and able, and we can sing our first hymn. 161.
How many of you have a favorite food? A favorite food, a food that you just love. How many? By show of hands. Sure. Yeah, it's hard to choose, I know. I'm like, oh, I love lasagna, meatloaf is good. Ham sandwiches, anyone? So what are some of your favorite foods? Just call them out. Pizza, avocado toast, spaghetti, pasta, anything pasta, peaches. I heard something over here. Nachos, salmon. It's a very, very diverse selection of foods there. Lentil soup. I just heard a good radio program about lentil soup. I also enjoy lentil soup. How many of you have a food that you really, really don't like? Something, oh, I see a hand. Sauerkraut. Ugh. Collard greens. Brussels sprouts. Lima beans and liver. Any other foods you're just not into? Okra. Anything cilantro. That's a common one for a lot of people. Aiden. Horseradish. Oh, I love horseradish, the way it makes my sinuses open. So, question. Have any of you ever had a food that you used to hate, but then have grown to appreciate? Mary and then Fran. Oysters. You used to hate them, and now they're not so bad. Brussels sprouts. We've talked about this. Yeah, they have changed over the years, Mike. The Brussels sprouts from when you were a kid are not the Brussels sprouts of today. Other foods that you've changed that maybe you like now. Bell peppers. You know, it wasn't until recently I actually learned that bell peppers are, like, all three colors are the same pepper. That's still kind of, but that's not the point of this. So, when I was younger, I hated spinach. Absolutely hated spinach. I thought it was slimy and gross, and it always tasted like metal. So the spinach I was used to was the spinach that my stepdad loved. It came in a can. If you've ever watched an episode of Popeye the Sailor Man, you know, the strong sailor man, and he always takes the can of spinach and squeezes it, eats it, and gets big and strong. That's the sort of spinach we are talking about. This was my only experience with spinach for many, many years. The slimy, metallic, scoop it out of a can spinach. That was all I knew of spinach. And I preferred to keep it that way, to be honest. I was not willing to give it a second chance. I thought nothing of it. It is just not a food I enjoy and not a food I eat. Well, as I grew up a little bit, and I found myself in college, suddenly I started being invited to dinner parties with people. Remember specifically a dinner party that one of my history professors, Diane, invited me to. And when we started dinner and everyone sat down at the table, I was surprised to find this delightful salad in front of me. It was this green salad with these leaves in it and strawberries, a nice vinaigrette. I think it had some walnuts or something in it. And I thought it was just the most delicious salad. I remember shoveling it in my mouth and then going for more. And finally, I turned to Diane and I asked her, "This is a delicious salad. What kind of greens are these?" Diane laughed. She looked at me and she said, "It's spinach." Suddenly, my whole view of spinach changed. I only knew that canned spinach, and now this fresh, crisp, tender, kind of silky spinach with the strawberries, this I could get behind. And ever since then, I have. In fact, spinach is one of the things every year I like to plant in my garden. It's one of the quickest crops that I can get a return on, which means I eat a lot of spinach. Things have changed for me. My relationship to spinach has changed. And I think that this is a good story about how sometimes we maybe start out with one opinion, one orientation, one sort of way we think things are. But over time, when maybe we try them in new configurations or experiment in new ways, we might find that that thing that we once thought was disgusting and absolutely hated is now one of our favorite foods. So, think about how this story, maybe not with foods, but how this story might apply in your real life, your everyday life. Where are the places where change is unfolding, moving you from one place, one opinion, to another? That's all the story I have for you. Before I share some words of prayer for us, I'd like to invite us just to let ourselves wiggle a little bit. Just however you feel comfortable, let your body wiggle. Taking a breath. I see some face wiggles over here, maybe stretch up. Earlier I was up on the stage preparing for the service, and Arlene told me to make myself big. So let's make ourselves just big and stretch. And make ourselves maybe smaller too, yeah. These words come from my colleague, Kyle Johnson. Mystery of the universe, ground of our very being. Truly, it is said that you make the sun rise and life-giving rains fall on both the just and the unjust. And in that way, yours is an abounding grace, and we give thanks. But it is true also that none of us are ever really spared. Neither the just nor the unjust. For try as we might, we are still subject to the challenges of pain, death, and separation, to the inherent impermanence of our material existence. And yet, the fact that no one is spared suggests that neither are we ever truly alone. Since we all partake in this ephemeral reality, so may the fact of our shared human condition foster empathy, compassion, and mutual loving support. May the stories of all those who have gone before us, ordinary flesh and blood people just like you, remind us of the deep reserves of courage and strength that lie within each and every one of us. And may the transient and ephemeral nature of life compel us to savor every moment, while also reminding us, particularly in the most trying times, that this too shall pass. May it be so. Amen.
On many Sundays, we set aside some time for the sharing of joys and sorrows. If you have a joy or a sorrow that you would like to share, please come forward, state your name, and in a few brief sentences, share your joy or sorrow. Pour a little water in the bowl for a joy, or place a stone in the joy for a sorrow, so that all of those sorrows can sink to the bottom and be overwhelmed by all the joy. If you are at home, please feel free to consider your own joys and sorrows. Remember that this part of the service is neither streamed nor recorded.
Well, it's time to mask up again and stand up. Hymn 123, Spirit of Life. There's only one verse, so you only get one chance at it.
This is that time during our service when we pass the baskets and ask you to help sustain this organization which so ably sustains us all. I admit that this isn't the most glamorous part of being a worship associate, asking for money. The most glamorous part is when you're all excited and shouting my name as if I were a member of the Beatles. However, this is the work that I must do, and this is the work that we must do together. If you are visiting for the first time, please feel free to let the baskets pass you by. You are our guest, and we are happy simply that you are with us. Would the ushers come forward to collect the offering?
In honor of Black History Month, I'm going to play you an old civil rights song.
Thank you for your gifts.
have the urge right now to just chant, Gregory, Gregory, Gregory. Almost 182 years ago, Unitarian minister Theodore Parker sparked a debate that still echoes through our congregations, today. This debate was aimed at identifying the core around which we build our liberal faith. Even back in 1841, our religious forebearers were seeking to define and understand our unique liberal religious tradition. It's in this context that Theodore Parker preached a sermon titled "The Transient and Permanent in Christianity." Just a little aside, by Christianity, he specifically means Unitarian Christianity. In this sermon, Parker states that, quote, "While true religion is always the same thing, in each century and every land, and each person that feels it, the Christianity of the pulpit, which is the religion taught of the people, which is the religion that is accepted and lived out, it has never been the same thing in any 2 centuries or lands, except only in name. The difference between what is called Christianity by the Unitarians in our times and that of some ages past is greater than the difference between Muhammad and the Messiah." Even back in 1841, Theodore Parker felt that the difference between the religious tradition that he practiced at the time, the Unitarian Christianity of the age, was so much different than the age before, that there was more difference between these 2 expressions of the same religious tradition as there is difference between Islam and Christianity. This way of viewing Unitarianism posits a tension between what was, what is, and what shall be. The implication of this quote from Parker suggests that each new generation of Unitarians takes up the religion that they inherit, and then somehow, after receiving their inheritance, change it. In this changing, Parker held that certain things would remain the same. These are the permanent features of our faith. Other features, however, change or fade away with time. These are the transient or mutable features of our faith. Essentially, for Parker, at the center of our religious tradition, he believed is an immutable core that from age to age remains the same. But the thing that changes is the traditions or expressions that we wrap around this core. These outer trappings come and go, but the heart of the tradition remains always the same. It is permanent. I find myself often, when talking to people about why they identify as a Unitarian Universalist today, that the conversation very quickly goes to our list of 7 principles. People find that there is something in the expressions of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, or justice, equity, and compassion in human relationships, or our principle to accept one another and encourage ourselves in spiritual growth as individuals and congregations. Many of us find these principles capture something that we feel in our core. Citing this list is understandable. It's short, it's graspable, and articulates a worldview that encourages us to work for justice by being active in the world. Our principles encourage us to live out our values. I think for many of us, this list of principles helps set aspirational goals for how we want to live our lives. I know I find that it's helpful to have shared language like the interconnected web of life and the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I find it helpful to have these shared phrases of language that can ground my conversations. And despite the love that many of us have for these statements, the love that we have for these principles, there is currently a serious revision being proposed in our association. So this isn't the first time that these principles have been revisited. It's been a little while, but they didn't come out of nowhere. If we turn back to a UU World article, the publication our association puts out now quarterly, but the UU World article from the year 2000, Warren Ross reminds us of some of the earlier articulations of the principles that we had. Specifically, Ross looks back at what were called the principles of a free faith that were affirmed by the General Assembly in 1961. This was the year that both Unitarians and Universalists consolidated together to form the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, the umbrella organization that we are part of today. Back in 1961, these two bodies, when they consolidated, put together a list of 6 principles, not 7, 6 principles that they felt articulated the goal of this new religious enterprise. To give you a sense of what these 6 principles of free faith were, I'll read just a few of them to you. Number 1, to strengthen one another in free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. Sounds kind of familiar. Let's skip down. Number 3, to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships. There's a lot going on there, but the language, it might sound a bit familiar if you know the 7 principles today. I'll skip down all the way to what was the 6th principle in 1961. To encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. With men of goodwill in every land. Sorry, everyone else. So this list of statements was affirmed by both, was a list of values that both denominations brought into the consolidation. There were previous versions of this, both within the American Unitarian churches and the Unitarian Association of America, that stated similar things. The language, of course, going back farther, becomes a little bit more dated from today's standard. From 1961 to today, a lot has changed in the world. A lot has changed. I wasn't even alive in 1961, so for me, the whole world has changed. And while some of the language of these statements has been updated and added to and added to, the spirit of these statements from 1961 can still be reflected in today's 7 principles. To affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, for instance, sounds a little bit like to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It's not the same, but the concepts are similar. And yet, despite these similarities, over time there has been a recent series of conversations about a need to completely revisit these principles. I think most notably this conversation started in 2017 when a group of delegates to the General Assembly proposed the addition of the 8th principle, a principle aimed at fostering a deeper commitment to dismantling racism and decentering white supremacy within our association. Since this 2017 effort by these delegates, around 150 congregations within our association have independently voted and affirmed the eighth principle, and have gone on to continue to advocate for its adoption within the association as a whole. Another group of delegates in, I believe it was 2018, proposed revisiting the language of the first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and to change it from person to beings. This group felt that we needed to include all sentient beings in the worth and dignity. Most recently, since 2020, a group within our association has called for us to look at our fifth principle, or our principle that affirms the use of the democratic process within our congregations and societies as a whole. And to use this principle as a lens to analyze what is the role of democracy in our 21st century movement. As a result of all of these conversations happening about what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist today and what values are core to our identity, a group was commissioned by the General Assembly of our association in 2020. This is a group of leaders from throughout our faith tradition, many of whom are actually global leaders in our faith tradition, who were tasked by our association to do an in-depth study of the principles of our faith. This group is called the Article 2 Study Commission because Article 2 is the part of our bylaws where these principles and the sources of our faith live. It's not a very glamorous name, and it's kind of a little bit interesting to think of such a theologically rich statements to be part of a legal document, our literal bylaws of incorporation. So, as I said earlier, these principles have changed over time. Since 1961, some language has been updated, and there were changes that were made from earlier versions that were brought into the 1961 edition. However, the last significant update that happened to these principles took place in 1987. To help put that in context, again, earlier I said that I'm 35, or will be 35 in September. I was born in 1988. The last significant revision of our principles defining what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist took place the year before I was born. To me, that's kind of impressive. It also causes me to really start wondering, is it time to revisit these principles? And yet, at the same time, despite all of these minor changes that have been made to update language, we moved away in 2018 from gendered language. The General Assembly changed several things to be more inclusive. We have revisited some of our traditional sources. I know when the sources of our faith were first put forward, the term Judeo-Christian was a popular term that was used to describe the sort of religious traditions, Judaism and Christianity, that draw on what we would call the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and then the New Testament. We now recognize that this phrase, Judeo-Christian, is actually problematic. And it posits a relationship that historians and archaeologists have not actually found evidence for that exists between the Jewish understanding of Scripture and the Christian. It puts them in the same level, and so we changed that. And yet, despite all of these little changes we have made, the world has changed so much more. And that's why the Article 2 Commission has been tasked with this work today. It's an attempt to reconcile our faith to the changes that have happened in our world by defining the transient, those outer trappings, and the permanent within our movement. This is an opportunity to name the unchanging core that sits at the center of what it means for us to be Unitarian Universalists. So I want to invite you to take a moment. You'll notice on the front of your order of service there's an image here. It's a heart. It's a little word cloud. You can't read all of the words because some of them are little itty-bitty tiny words, and even in the original image, before we reproduced it, they were hard to read. But just take a moment, look at that image, and notice what it is that you see. Just notice what words stand out to you. So this image here is actually, it's a word cloud that one of my colleagues put together. They took all of the words of the text from our gray hymnal, every phrase and sentence, and put them into a computer program. This program takes all of these words and then generates a cloud. And the position and size of the word sort of dictates how often, the frequency with which that word appears in our hymns. What word is most prominent in this picture? Love. Love, right there in the center. Love. Having a neat list of principles to point to can be super helpful. It's nice, it's easy, it's graspable. Do you know how many times I've been out somewhere and someone asks, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a Unitarian Universalist church minister." And they respond by saying, "What?" I'm sure some of you, if you've been out in the world and have confessed that you go to church, you get similar reactions from people in your life. There's an assumption that we make about what it means to be a church, about what it means to be a minister. And oftentimes, as our faith tradition, as we know, we subvert that assumption. It's easy to have a list to point to, but ours is not an easy faith. It's not easy to define. It's not easy to practice. However, when we strip away all of the eloquence and technicality of the phrases that we call our principles, the core of our tradition is love. Love is what we sing about. Love is what we preach about. Love is what we do when we work for justice. Love is what we embody when we show up for each other. The core of our tradition, the permanent thing that rests at the center of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, is love. Well, it's a good thing I agree with the Article 2 Study Commission on this one. Because after a few years of work, research, and study, soliciting feedback, the proposal that they have come up with, and I won't read it in its entirety, but I will have it make sure that it gets shared. But the proposal that they have come up with is one in which love is at the center. This commission says love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. And that from this expression of love that we call Unitarian Universalists emanate a list of other values. Interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity. These are the values that through the generations we have expressed again and again in our statements of belief. The words have changed. Our relationship to what it is that gives us meaning has changed. We once saw ourselves as firmly rooted in the Christian tradition. Today, many of us don't identify with that core teaching. And yet, here we are as a people continuing in that long legacy, holding love at our center. Whatever the outcome of the Article 2 Commission and their work, whether it's accepted or rejected by the General Assembly, which is an option. This year at the General Assembly, the proposal will be considered by the delegates. If it passes with a simple majority, it'll go into an additional year of study to be reconsidered a year from now in 2024, requiring a supermajority to be ratified. It's possible that nothing serious will be changed about how we articulate our faith. And that's okay. Because for me, the value in this work is having the conversation in the first place. The value is in taking the time to collectively pause and reflect on what we believe and why we believe it. To question ourselves and identify what is permanent and what is transient. I see the work of this commission as being less about changing what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist and more about exploring what it means to remain true to our faith in an ever-changing world. We are a living tradition. With each new day and generation, it is our responsibility to revisit old assumptions and breathe new life into our understanding of how to best express love. To the glory of life. I'd like to invite us, as you are willing and able, to rise, to don our masks as we prepare to sing our closing hymn of the service. Hymn number 131. This is our hymn of the month, Love Will Guide Us.
Please repeat after me as I extinguish our flaming chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our service has ended, but our service to the world and one another begins anew. As we go forth, and no matter what words we express it, may we commit ourselves to holding love at the center of what we do. Amen.